Erev Tov, Boker Tov, definitely in its kufa of the Ha'ir Shushan Navocha, the state of the seeming randomness of events and the surprising twists and turns of our contemporary time strongly resonate with every single time I think about the Megillah or open the Megillah or try and delve deeply into the Megillah. And I'm hoping that today's shiur, which is a conceptually difficult shiur, but I think a profoundly revelatory one and meaningful one, will touch on those issues of the seeming randomness. Yeah, not only just ask everyone to mute, please, their audio. The seeming randomness of series of seemingly unrelated events, and we will try to make sense of Bayamim Ha'im Bazman Hazeh through the lens of, as this whole series has been, the deep backstories of Megillat Esther, through surprising characters that we would not necessarily expect to see surface in Megillat Esther. We know the cast of characters so far. Together, we've profiled Nimrod, Esav, Moshe, and now we are on Balaam, the evil prophet, Gentile prophet, and we'll try and rope him into the story. I don't think we're going to have to work too hard, though, because I think that the sages very much want us to see the Megillah, at least on some level, through the lens of the outlook of Balaam. So let's get started. As we started in this whole series, when I introduced the idea of Nimrod and Neo-Babylonia in Megillat Esther, it was through the lens of the Petichtot. A Petichta, to refresh all of our memories, is a midrashic device that is an prologue or an introduction that the sages use to deliver their deeper concept of what Megillat Esther is about. Petichtot are found throughout different contexts, but I'm speaking specifically about the 14 Petichtot that different sages from different generations, all recorded for us in Masechet Megillah, used to introduce their drashot to the Megillah. So we're going to start with the Petichta of Rav Matna. Rav Matna, and we'll look together here in source number 1. Rav Matna Amar, and Rashi here says, that's the actual language in the Gemara, but Rashi here says, Patach le pitcha lahe parshata. It's a formula, basically. Amar, that Rav Matna says, but he's saying it as an introduction to his drasha, to Megillat Esther. He brings in a verse from the book of Deuteronomy, from the book of Devarim, just as we had seen that Rabbi Yonatan brought in a verse from Yeshayahu. Rav Matna chooses a verse from Devarim. And what is the verse that he chooses to frame the Megillah? Kimi goy gadol asher lo elokim grovim elav. For what nation is there so great that has God so near to them? And that is this is a verse in the beginning of Sefer Devarim, where Moshe is speaking about the imminent entrance of the Israelites into the land of Israel, and how the world will recognize the intimate relationship between God and his people because of how God will act on their behalf. For what nation is there so great that has God so near to them? Now, as with every midrashic device, Petichtot included, the sages assume that all of us are borot sod she'eno ma'abdim tipa, that we all know the entire Torah backwards and forwards, and that we'll use the verse that is highlighted just as a jump-off point to understand the broader context, because Rav Matna is only quoting part of the verse in Deuteronomy. So let's look at the verse in its entirety that Rav Matna is so taken by when he thinks of the Megillah. Kimi goy gadol asher lo Elokim krovim elav, Hashem Elokeinu, b'chol harenu elav. For what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as is our God, whenever we might call out to him? It's the last part of this verse that I think is so highly evocative of the themes of the Megillah. I think were we just to look at this verse on the surface, then what Rav Matna is saying is that everybody recognized, or it was easily recognizable in the days of Achashverosh and Esther and Mordechai, that God was present, even though his name is not in the Megillah, and even though we might have to do a little bit of searching, he was manifest in the way that he chooses to be manifest in the world through nature. Now, that I think is the surface way of understanding why Rav Matna might have chosen this verse. However, Midrash is never meant to be taken superficially. And so I think were we to look at the broader context here of the verse in Dvarim, what Rav Matna is saying is that God is present with us and in our midst whenever it is that we karenu elav, whenever it is that we call out to him. Now I'm going to use this idea of kri'ah, kuf resh aleph, the calling, or to reach out to someone with intent, which is what that verb means, as a way of introduction that I think many of you are probably familiar with. It's a common theme in looking at the deeper concept of the Megillah, that we deal, when it comes to Megillat Esther, with a certain dichotomy. The dichotomy being Mordechai and Haman, the dichotomy being one who is let's say a Baal Kri'ah, someone who knows to call out, to cry out, to reach his fellow fellow members of his people, to lead his people, to see his calling, one can say, in the world, as opposed to Haman, who does not embody this kriya. If this is a new concept to you, that's fine. But I just wanted to begin the shiur with this, and I'll develop it over the next few minutes, and hopefully that'll become just the basis for our further discussion. What do I mean by kriya versus the alternative? If Mordechai is a Baal kriya, then the alternative to that must be something else, something closely related, but something which is essentially inimically different. So to do that, we would look to the antithesis of Mordechai, who is Haman, and the verb that our sages will associate with Haman and with Haman's ilk, meaning Haman in this context and in all contexts should be understood as the embodiment of Amalek. Haman Ha'agagi is a genetic, and the one can say, for lack of a better word, spiritual inheritor of Amalek's mantle and his legacy. And so even though I didn't bring you the verse in the 6th chapter of the Megillah, when Haman is speaking to his wife Zeresh, then he tells her, Kol asher karahu, everything that has happened to him, a word that's echoed here in Esther, 2 chapters earlier, Esther Dalet. We'll look at it a little bit more closely. But here you can see, and again, I think this is a concept that many are familiar with, the idea of kri'ah, which is an intentional calling, right? Well, what's my calling, right? What's my meaning in life? The reading meaning into something, as opposed to kuf resh hey. The hey can be elided to just be a kuf resh, 2-letter root, but a kuf resh hey, which is more of a sense of coincidence or happenstance, mikre, right? So the two words kuf resh aleph and kuf resh hey, the aleph and the hey both are somewhat weaker letters, but those two letters sort of spell the whole difference in outlook. One can say between Mordechai as embodiment of Am Yisrael and Haman as embodiment of Amalek. So when Haman is telling Zeresh, his wife, about everything that happened to him when he went to Ahasuerus's palace that night, and when he had a plan, and when the plan was turned on its head, and when instead of his being lauded and paraded through the streets of Shushan, he had to parade Mordechai through the streets of Shushan. In his tfisa olamit, in his outlook, in his machshava, it is there's a randomness there. There's not something that he can make sense of. Et kol asher karahu, everything that had happened to him. Now, this is a word that we would think to associate with Haman, because we'll see how strongly it's associated with Amalek. Many of us are familiar with that. What's a little bit more surprising is that when we look at the context in the Megillah, can everybody hear me okay, by the way? Okay. We see that the word is also associated with Mordechai, surprisingly. When Mordechai was approached by Hatach, Esther had sent Hatach to inquire as to why he was wearing sackcloth and mourning and wailing in the streets. Vayaged lo Mordechai et kol asher karahu. Mordechai told him all that had happened to him, not all that he had been called upon to do, but this language again, this word of a flimsier word, I would say, the word of, so just, this is circumstantial. This is what happened to me, about the amount of money that Haman had offered to pay to destroy the Jews. So that's something that should catch us a little bit off guard, and definitely caught Chazal off guard. And Chazal, when they see this context of Mordechai and this word karahu, they're going to jump on this as their trigger to bring this dichotomy of kri'ah, of calling with an aleph, with mikreh, into sharp focus. And let's see how they do this. Here I'm in Esther Rabbah, which is quoted by Rashi on the verse in Perek Dalet. Vayaged lo Mordechai et kol asher karahu, amar lahatach, lech emor la ben bno shel karahu ba alechem. He says to Hatach, go and tell Esther, that the descendant or the embodiment, ben beno, I love this expression in Hebrew because it's not necessarily literally a descendant. It's the embodiment of karahu, of he who sees things as circumstantial or without calling or without meaning, has come upon you. Hadahu dichtiv asher karcha baderech. We are arriving at this idea of karahu, that there is someone in the Megillah who embodies karahu, based on a far earlier source, asher korcha baderech, of a nation or of an outlook that had encountered you circumstantially on the way. And this is something, again, that I think I'll repeat happily, but I think many of us are familiar with, the idea of mikreh, of people who cannot read meaning into their existence or into other nations' existence. In other words, a people whose outlook in life is nihilistic outlook, is the outlook of Amalek. In the language of Parshat Zachor, which we will be reading in a couple of weeks' time on Shabbat, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek b'derech b'tzeitchem miMitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you after you left Egypt. Asher korcha baderech, that they encountered you on the way, right? They just happened upon you on the way. Vayezanev b'cha kol hanecheshalim acharecha this very redolent language which we will revisit, where they cut down, right, like a zanab is a tail, right? Or they cut off it's the those who were straggling on the way, those who were in the back, and you were tired and weary, and here most of the commentaries will understand v'lo yarei Elokim, meaning that Amalek did not fear God, and it was their lack of fear of God that allowed for this happenstantial encounter to occur. So this word karcha is affiliated with Amalek. So therefore, we expect it to be affiliated with Haman, as we saw. I didn't bring the text here, but as I mentioned, we saw in the context of Esther, Perek Vav, where Haman is speaking to Zeresh. And then here it comes up again with Mordechai, where Mordechai is not saying, I don't believe that there's meaning to this. He's saying, it's kol asher karahu, he who embodies mikra, he who embodies happenstance, is being sicked upon us, or is sicking himself upon us, or is imminently going to cause us grave damage. And so the karahu, the Chazal are treating as a buzzword here for Amalek. Ben bino shel karahu ba'alechem. So this idea of mikra, I think, deserves a little bit more refining. And I'd like to do so by way of Rashi on the verses that we just read, so that we can understand Haman better, and by extension, understand Amalek better, and then eventually get to the topic of today's shiur, which is the granddaddy of them all, Bilam. The granddaddy of nihilism. So if we look at Rashi here, Rashi is directly quoting from the Tanchuma. I just think that it's easier for us to absorb in the time that we have Rashi's reworking of the Tanchuma. So I didn't bring you the original Midrashic source, but trust me that every element of Rashi here is quoted straight from Tanchuma. Rashi says, when we're dealing with a root like kuf resh with a hey at the end, then we can play fast and loose with how we use that hey and reduce ourselves to kuf resh and see all of the possible potential connotations of that kuf resh verse, kuf resh root, all intimate the same concept. Asher karcha baderech lashon mikra. That's the most common way to understand who encountered you on the way. It was as if by happenstance, as if there was no purpose to it, as if they didn't set out to destroy you, but rather they just stumbled upon you. Davar acher, lashon keri v'tum'ah, shaya mitam'an b'mishkav zchor. When we speak of a bal keri, or when we speak of the idea of keri, which means seminal emission, what we're talking about here is a lack of purpose. That's the concept behind what keri means. Keri is either a seminal emission without purpose. In other words, it's not in the context of sexual relations, or in the context that Rashi is bringing it here, tumashaya mitaman mishkav zachor, which is also understood as not with the potential to bring forth life. So a certain wastefulness, one can say, or purposelessness, right? Hitting on the same concept. So mikra and keri clearly hit on the same concept here. Davar acher, let's add another layer of meaning to this kuf resh, l'shon kor, the chum. It's a language of coldness, right? Coldness, we still use it today. If you have colloquialisms, they say I'm cool, right? Or someone's cold. Let's use the simplest formulation. If you have like a cold fish or someone's cold, then they're kind of like, they're lacking excitement, they're lacking passion, they're lacking warmth, they're lacking a sense of engagement, right? Oh, it's all cool with me, meaning I don't want to engage too much with it. Anything you say, I'm cool with it. I don't really care enough to engage. I will distance myself from a sense of purpose. So these words, mikra, keri, krirut, kara, they all indicate the same concept, which is a deliberate undoing of any sense of purpose and meaning. Sinencha v'hevshircha merititcha, that to cooling off. Hifshircha means like a tepidness, right, of the boiling hot passions, one can say, that Am Yisrael had at that time. Were swirling around Am Yisrael. That all the peoples, after God had demonstrated his deep connection with the Israelites by redeeming them from Egypt and delivering them out of Egypt, they all were too fearful to fight against Israel. Ubazeh, and then this one comes, Bidchil, and he starts in with Israel. And as soon as he starts in with Israel, well, then Hezbollah and the Houthim and the Iranians and anyone who wants can start in. Because what is it essentially? We're familiar with this mashal through Rashi. Mashal la'ambate rotachat. It's comparable, the parable would be to a boiling hot bath. Shem kol bria yichala lered b'tocha. Only the craziest person would immerse himself in it. Ba ben blial echad b'kafatz v'yarad l'tocha. One idiot comes and he jumps in. Afa pish nichva. Okay, he himself might get burned, but what does he effectively do? He cools it off for the others. Amalek comes and cools off the torpid passion that was surrounding Am Yisrael, this great sense of trepidation that the peoples of the world had felt with Am Yisrael. One nation will come and get burned because they are so set on deconstructing and cooling off and diminishing the heat of Am Yisrael's fire. And so this is why this word mikra, asher karcha baderech, is so perfect for Amalek, because of their willingness to suffer, even as the mashal puts it here, just so they can reduce any sense of meaning. I'd like to just, throughout this shiur, I'm just going to be reading a couple of segments that I have written up, just because the concepts sometimes are very difficult. So sometimes if I write it up first in just a couple of sentences, I find that I'm best able to deliver it. So bear with me for 3 or 4 sentences that I have written up. To Amalek, everything is arbitrary and nothing is significant. Set on dampening the perception that God truly cared about the welfare of Yisrael, Amalek attacks the nascent nation fresh from their triumphant redemption in Egypt. We saw this last week. They refuse to acknowledge or respect the notion of a nurturing God who protects and guides his people. To do so would be to admit that God cares. It's not that Amalek doesn't believe in God. It's that Amalek Amalek doesn't have any fear of a potential meaning that God might assign to the Israelites. Amalek's outlook is represented in the Torah by the root huf resh he, happenstance, carelessness, coldness, chance. In his vicious onslaught against Israel, Amalek dismisses any interpretation of events as meaningful or necessitating response. So Amalek refuses to engage in kri'ah. Kri'ah with an aleph is a reading of significance or a call to purpose. And instead, he is the champion of mikra, of happenstance, of the cold ideology of seeing only random chaos in the world with no underlying pattern or potential for meaning. And it's with this background, that was all by way of background, that I'd like now to try and insert Bilam into our story. And I'll do so by way of the framing of Sefer Vayikra, even though Bilam is a Bamidbar story. Vayikra is the introduction of these ideas at the very beginning of Vayikra and at the very end of Vayikra, with, as I mentioned at the beginning of the shiur, the elided aleph and hey. The aleph and hey can fall very easily. But Vayikra opens with the warmth and the chibah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has towards Moshe. And yes, it's with a small aleph, but that small aleph contains this entire shiur. Vayikra el Moshe, vayidaber Hashem elav me'ol ha'moed lemor. The inverse, the opposite of Amalek and his keri would be Moshe and his kriya. as Rashi identifies this kriya of Moshe, this language of the Lord calling to Moshe. L'chol debrot, u'l'chol amirot, u'l'chol tzivuyim kadma kriya. Whenever the Lord communicated with Moses, whether it was by way of dibor and amira or at tzivoy, it was always with the lashon of affection, lashon chiba, vayikra el Moshe. It was a lashon of purposefulness, of meaningfulness, of this is your calling, Moshe. I use that word very deliberately because I think it works as a perfect translation. Lashon shemalachei hasharet mishtamshin bo. This is the language of the celestial angel. Shneamar v'kara ze el ze. Aval l'nevei hu'umot ha'olam nigla lehen b'lashon arai v'tum'ah. But when God communicates with the Gentile prophets, it's in a much different form. There's a coldness there. There's a distance there. There's a transactionary nature, one can even say. There's a pollution there, an impurity. Shneamar vayikar Elokim el Bil'am. When God calls out to Bil'am, it is not in the lashon of vayikra. It's not a kriya, but it's a keri, it's a krirut, it's a mikra, it's a totally elided hey, or aleph for that matter. All we have with Bil'am is the word vayikar, which is heavily redolent and highly associative with asher korcha baderech. So much so that the midrashic associative mind will make this connection for us. Let's see how it does so. And this is how we insert Bil'am into our story. Whenever we talk about Haman Hagagi, we have to go back to his roots with Amalek and that battle where the Amalekim pulled off Israel's ardor. No, Israel had ardor. They cooled off the other nations of the world's fear of Israel. Amalek came. Where was Amalek coming from? This is one of the great names of the sages. We should bring this back. Somebody has to name their child Kruspedai. Amar Rabbi Kruspedai, b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Shaba me'etzel Bil'am harasha. Amalek had gone to consult with, as I said, the granddaddy of nihilism. Shaba litol etzam mimenu. That he went to seek out advice. And here, you can read along in the English because I just want to make sure that we get to all of our materials. So I just want to go through things quickly. Amalek said, we know that you are very wise. How can we best the Israelites? I included here the whole of the midrash because the whole of this midrash is so current. It's insane. Amalek says to Bil'am, look what this nation did to Egypt, who had performed many kindnesses to them. That he's this ultimate spin doctor. Amalek can spin anything, right? And he says that the Egyptians, who we know of to have been extremely cruel taskmasters and severe oppressors of the Israelites, look at what the Israelites are doing to the Egyptians who only showered kindnesses on them. If they managed to do this to Egypt, how much more so are they going to do to everyone else? And Bilam says, all right, there's only really one thing you can do, is you have to go and fight against them. Yeah, you're going to get burned and you're going to get damaged, but at least you'll cool them off and you'll make them vulnerable for others. You'll insert a new narrative. You'll make things far more complex than they are. And that is what Amalek did. So when we have Bil'am coming into the story here, yes, it's through a midrashic device, but the midrashic device has a strong textual pin, as I pointed out, as Rashi pointed out, with the idea of Vayikar Hashem el Bil'am, that God happened upon Bil'am or encountered Bil'am, as opposed to that sense of calling. I want to take this time, we're halfway through the shiur, and I want to leave where we were and attempt to go a little bit more conceptually deeper. Where we've been so far is basically a fairly classic setup between Kriya and Keri, between those who will choose to find meaning in life and find purpose in life and find patterns in existence, and those who will just reduce all of existence to a series of meaningless coincidences. And those are essentially, when you hear shiurim on Purim, that's basically that's a very classic presentation of how to ligalot et Esther, how to reveal that which is hidden, or to choose the Amalek root, which is the root of Keri and coldness. What I would like to do now is to try and dig a little bit deeper by way of Bilam, and see that Bilam should not be dismissed, and randomness should not be dismissed. And there really is something to Keri. In other words, I think that it's not a dichotomy of true and false. I think that there is a tremendous truth and power to mikra, to randomness. I think the more that we think more deeply about life, the more we recognize the seeming, the randomness of events. And I don't want to be afraid to touch on that. So I'd like to do that right now by, first of all, framing Bilam as the counterpart to Moshe. He is not some petty, lightweight prophet. He is on par with the ultimate prophet, with Moshe Rabbeinu, even though we have a famous verse in the Bible that tells us there was no other prophet in Israel like Moshe, who had aspaklaya hami'ira, who could see HaKadosh Baruch Hu panim el panim. No other prophet approached that within Israel. But the Midrash is quick to pick up on Lo kam navi od b'Yisrael kemoshe, that while that's true regarding the prophets of Israel, there was another heavyweight prophet that could go, I don't know the right boxing expression, but blow for blow with Moshe Rabbeinu in the ring. And let's look at this carefully in Bamidbar Rabbah. And this is a midrashic motif that repeats itself over and over again. I just chose this particular formulation of the midrash. Lo kam navi od b'Yisrael kemoshe, b'Yisrael lo kam, aval b'umot ha'olam kam. K'dei shelo yehi pitchon pe l'umot ha'olam lomar ilo haya lanu navi kemoshe hayinu avdim lakadosh baruch hu. This is explaining the reason why there was another heavyweight prophet within the world. Now, who was this prophet? Is a navi haya lahem kemoshe ze Bilam ben Beor. There was a greatness to Bilam, and the midrash will go on to say that there were three things that Moshe embodied, or that he achieved, that Bilam did not achieve. Because that's not the focus of the shiur, you can just read these on your own. Three great achievements. However, I'll skip to the last part of the midrash. Shalosh midot hayu biyad Bilam, ma shalo hayu biyad Moshe. Do not think that Moshe surpassed Bilam. Bilam had three achievements that Moshe did not achieve in his life. Moshe lo haya yodea mi midaber imo, Bilam haya yodea mi midaber imo. Moshe did not always know who was speaking with him, but Bilam always knew. Moshe lo haya yodea matai HaKadosh Baruch Hu midaber imo, uBilam haya yodea matai HaKadosh Baruch Hu midaber imo. Moshe did not know when God would speak with him, but Bilam always knew. And finally, Bilam haya midaber imo b'chol sha'a sheyirtzeh. Bilam could call upon God at any point that he wanted. Moshe lo haya midaber imo b'chol sha'a sheyirtzeh. So here, I bring this midrash because I'd like for us all to be taking Bilam very, very seriously and understand that there were achievements that Bilam Harasha, who advised Amalek to cool off Israel, that he achieved that surpassed even Moshe. And I will demonstrate with a slightly different formulation of the same concept. I don't have it here in English. Sfaria doesn't have Tana Devei El Rabbah translated into English, but bear with me as I translate. Lo hiniach hakadosh baruch hu davar ba'olam shelo gila lebil'am. How astounding! God did not leave anything in the world that He did not reveal to Bil'am. That's an astounding and an amazing statement. And then he goes on to explain why this was. And I'll just get to the very last part of this midrash. There were elements in which Moshe surpassed Bil'am, as we saw in the previous formulation of the midrash, elements in which Bil'am surpassed Moshe. And in the sense of Moshe surpassing Bil'am, it was in this sense. Moshe yeter b'davar echad mi Bil'am, v'Moshe hu omer vayikra el Moshe. Moshe surpassed Bil'am in the following regard, in that when God would call out to Moshe, it was with intent, it was with affection. U'bibil'am kitiv vayikar Elokim el Bil'am. So the midrash here is redirecting our attention to this tension between how God would relate to Moshe and Bil'am, while at the same time not dismissing Bil'am and not diminishing him, but acknowledging him for what he was. When we look at the Vayikar of Bil'am and we look at the Vayikra of Moshe, and I don't want to belabor this point because we've already examined this idea. Really, the only reason I chose to include this additional version of that same midrashic concept, the midrashic motif of the prophets of Israel and the prophets of the world, and the comparison of Moshe to Bil'am is, well, there are two reasons. One is that the rabbi who's being quoted here, the sage who is being quoted here, is Yisachar of Kfar Mandi. Kfar Manda is my neighbor up here in the Galil Tachton. So I always have a very warm spot in my heart whenever I see the Rev Yitzchak Mishichin or Yisachar Kfar Mandi or anyone in the Galil Tachton. And that's one reason why I brought this midrash. It's personal. But beyond that, the idea again of Vayikar containing with it a certain lack of purity or a certain tum'ah, a certain coldness, is important to emphasize, because again, the kuf resh root can be, you can add an aleph to it and you can add a hey to it, and you'll entirely change its meaning. But and I pointed out that Vayikra Hashem Moshe, when God calls to Moshe, again, that's with a small aleph, but the aleph is still there and it's still maintained. So I just wanted to point that out. I would like now, very, very quickly, before we go further on with Bil'am, just to wrap up this idea by way of the Mishnah Torah, by way of the Rambam. Rambam here in Hilchot Taniot, he says the following. He says, you have a choice. You can, and this is a classic, I think, religious approach to life. You can choose to read God into your life, right? You can choose to see the terrible things that God brings to the world as purposeful, as prompts to repent, as prompts to respond, or you can choose to ignore them. And he puts it this way. He says, if you don't cry out to God, if you don't relate to reality around you, אם לא יזעקו ולא יריעו, אלא יאמרו דבר זה ממקרא העולם אירע לנו. This is just how things happen. That's life. This is just how the chips fall. Vitzara zo nikra nikret. Whatever terrible thing happened to me personally or to our people is just happenstance. Hare zo derech achzariyut. The Rambam, Maimonides, calls this cruelty. It's cold and it's cruel. And it removes you from the warmth of this world. And it will just add further damage to the world, because as God rounds off the book of Vayikra, he starts with Kri'ah and he ends with Keri. He says at the end of Vayikra, V'halachta mimi bekeri, if you choose to relate to me the way that Amalek does, which is with a lack of looking at life as purposeless, as with a lack of meaning, with a lack of structure, with a lack of pattern, without sensing any greater calling. Valachtem gameni imachem, the most beautiful words, bachamat keri. And I then will respond to you with the heat of coldness. That's literally what those words mean. Bachamat keri. I will respond to you with the wrath or the heat or the passion of total randomness. The more you relate to the world as random, the more you're going to see it as that. That the classic, I guess, way to understand is that b'midash adam malech ba malechinotel. If you continue to relate to events in this world as meaningless and purposeless, then I'm just going to heap on purposelessness on top of you. So I definitely wanted to bring this Rambam because it's usually where shiurim end. It's usually where we get to, and then to wrap it up in a nice package and say, don't look at the world as a series of random events. Look at the world as God's plan, as planned out by God. God intended for this terrible tragedy to happen. God is bringing these tragedies. God is with us through these tragedies, and we must respond. And this is the Rambam's formulation, and I'm not in any way diminishing the power of that, because that is I think the classic approach. It's what I call the religious approach to reality. I'm not perhaps the most religious person, so I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction with your permission, and feel free to think otherwise. But I would like to argue that the Keri, or the Mikra of Bil'am, who is the embodiment of Keri, that's how God approaches Bil'am through Vayikar, right? Through happening upon him. And that's how Bil'am instructs his acolytes, his disciples, the Amalekites, to then continue on to not view the world as a meaningful structure, but to see the world as a series of unrelated moments. The Gemara, and I didn't bring it for you here, it's Gemara and Brachot, says that Bilam was a master of rega. That was his buzzword. You know what the word rega means? It means one moment, right? Bilam he was a master of moments. The world was to him a series of unrelated moments. Look at how Bilam's philosophy is contained within the blessing that he is forced to give to Israel. Were we to look at the translation of this blessing in Bamidbar, Mi mana afar Yaakov. Oh, who can count the dust of Jacob? They are so numerous. Umisparet rova Yisrael, and number the huge numbers. Who can possibly fathom the huge numbers of Israel? Tamot nafshi moti sharim v'tiyachariti kamohu. May I die the death of the uprights. May my fate be like theirs. Meaning that were I to even try, then I would never be able to. It's a language. It's an expression of I give up. Right? There's no way I can fathom all the bracha, all the blessing that has been heaped on Israel. But the Gemara is not going to rest on its laurels and say that this is just a language of blessing. The Gemara here in Nida says this is the encapsulation of Bilam's nihilism. When Bilam is saying, Mi mana afar Yaakov umispar et rova Yisrael, he's saying, I don't understand you, God. your ways make no sense to me. What he is saying is, Misaper mi mana afar Yaakov misaper umispar et Rova Yisrael melamed shakadosh baruch hu yoshev v'sofer et reviyoteim shel Yisrael matai tzavot tipa shehad tzadik notzar hemena. That Bilam says, I don't understand, God, how you can just sit there and watch coupling after coupling after coupling and just sit and say, well, I wonder which sperm is going to fertilize that egg, right? Like, of all the millions of lost sperm, right, there's only going to be one that fertilizes that egg. In other words, what he's saying, the deeper concept here, is that should God, who is pure and holy, and whose ministers are pure and holy, be involved in this? Not that it's something dirty, not that it's something wrong, but it's so wasteful. It's so inefficient. It's so purposeless. So much sperm is wasted. Right? That's the definition of evolutionary waste. Is the single sperm and all of the millions that are wasted. And so what Bilam is saying here is that and again, I'll have to read here with your permission. He rejects the idea that evolutionary processes can be meaningful because there's just too much waste involved. Why would God create such an inefficient system? Why should God be concerned with this putrid matter formed by random processes, either at the onset of life, right? Why is this something that makes any sense? If there's a designer to the world, then it is the most inefficient possible system of bringing forth life. And so, he and I have another couple of lines if you'll indulge me. Bilam's incredulity at God keeping track of essentially the ejaculations of Israel goes beyond the scurrilous. That's not what we're talking about here. This isn't some kind of a piquante story. It's a mocking attack on the perception that there is purpose and direction to one of the most basic examples of randomness in creation, and that God acknowledges that purpose. Bilam uses literal keri. This is literally what he's looking at. He's looking at keri, the very primal word of mikra, the ultimate in wasted matter with only one cell serving, right, and 100 million lost, as proof of how there are no inherent patterns to existence. If God was truly efficient, he wouldn't have created a reproductive system which wastes millions of sperm cells just to fertilize one egg. For those of you who can bear with this next sentence, it's a heavy sentence. Evolution is an almost infinite matrix of chaotic processes involving mostly waste and destruction. And Bilam ridicules the notion that there is anything special that emerges from sheer randomness. That's what this pasuk is saying, that creation is sheer randomness. And that why should we assign any special meaning to that which emerges from randomness? And then the follow-up of this existential crisis, one can say, that Bilam is going through, or his nihilism, this expression of his nihilism, is that it was specifically due to this matter that he became blind. Immediately his eye was blinded, as the verse continues on, Nu'um hagever satum ha'ayin, the saying of the man whose eye is shut. So what I'd like to try and express here is that Bilam and Amalek again being the disciple of Bilam, they reject the notion of divine concern or care with creation at all. Why should God be concerned by random processes, either at the outset of life or any point further on in its development? But what the Midrash is saying is that God is fascinated. That's the word. He's sitting there and he's like, I wonder what's going to happen. I wonder what baby's going to be born. Of all the millions of babies that could have been born from this one event, which one's going to be born? It's not that God is deciding which baby's going to be born. He's sitting and saying, oh, what's going to be? And this concept is expressed further in that same Gemara by No, I'm sorry, it's in the Gemara and Chulim. This concept of God embracing randomness within creation and creating a world that evolves through evolutionary waste, right? Because waste is carry. Waste is the is what happens, what the result is of all of this randomness, right? It seems to stand as the counter to purposefulness, right? It seems to be, well, if everything is wasteful, everything is wasted, then how can we read purpose into it? Let's just bear with me while we look at how God did not top down design and plan, but allowed for creation to emerge of itself. When God brings forth the grasses and the trees on the second and the third day of creation, he says, Hadshei haaretz desha, esev mazria zera, eitz pri oseh pri limino. Let the earth bring forth all of its vegetation, but let trees speciate. You see the difference there? Hadshei haaretz desha, esev mazria zera. Let the earth bring forth its, however it may bring forth all of its various vegetation. Maybe it'll turn into a homogeneous spread, but the trees should stay distinct. Eitz pri oseh pri limino. But what happens is not that. Vatotzei haaretz desha, esev mazria zera liminehu. The desha, as it was, decides to speciate and to be wasteful and to go off in a million different directions with so much mutation and so much wastefulness, just like the trees were told to do. In other words, this word liminehu, per species, is something that the desha did on its own. Vayar Elokim kitov, and God saw that it was good. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa taught, Yehi chvod Hashem laolam, yismach Hashem b'ma'asav. Let the glory of the Lord endure forever. Let the Lord rejoice in his creation. Pasuk zeh sar ha'olam amru. This is the verse that the minister of the world said. When God, at what point did the minister of the world say this? When God said, Liminehu bi'ilanot, only the trees have to speciate. Desha, you can develop on your own. It was that the desha decided. The desha said, wow, God exalts in speciation, in many, many different types, in all kinds of crazy mutations. Well, that's what we're going to do. The grasses drew an a fortiori inference, a kal v'chomer. They said, if God wishes the mixing of the species, if he just wants a dull, homogeneous spread over the entire world, then why did he demand that the trees speciate? So if the trees, which do not naturally grow mixed, were told to each grow separately and to speciate, how much more so we should all go in our own separate directions. And this is what brought God so much joy. Hashem la'olam, yismach Hashem b'ma'asav. The minister of the world began to speak and say, may the glory of the Lord endure forever, that the Lord rejoice in his works, who do his will, even when not explicitly instructed. Take that line off, because I don't think it's the right definition. What I mean, what I think that this Gemara is saying is that the grasses and shrubs determined to maintain the differences in Maaseh Bereshit, rather than just dutifully fulfilling their instructions, God rejoiced in this varied, colorful, random world, which was uniquely speciated. The idea of keri, the idea of randomness, is not something that we should just assign to Amalek and dismiss. Keri, or randomness, is the means through which we discover ourselves. The world essentially, let me try and put it thusly. There's a there while I had introduced a religious approach to reality, basically, which is that everything is part of God's plan and everything is planned out by God, and we're just kind of uh, carrying out God's plan. And then the other extreme approach of there is no purpose and everything is random and God is not involved. I think that there's a middle ground approach, and it's the following. There are certain constants, that there are certain patterns that emerge. There are certain um, designs upon creation that we will ultimately be redeemed, that Israel is promised eternity, that Israel is Reshit, that they are the chosen of God, where there's a commitment to life. There's a commitment to not destroy the world. These are all patterns that were entrenched into Bria, into the creation. But God does not pre-program the emergent situation. Creation will work itself out to its desired end, but how it works itself out is not predetermined. So compare it to, if you will, a popcorn kernel, right? If I put a popcorn kernel in a microwave, then I can't tell the exact moment when the single popcorn kernel is going to explode, when something can happen. I can't determine when something is going to happen necessarily. But were I to put a larger sampling, a whole bag of popcorn into the microwave, then I've set my timer to 3 minutes, and I know that 3/4 of the bag are all going to be popped. In other words, there's a randomness to creation that is something that is absolutely beautiful, and it's something that God rejoices in, and is the Bilam, it's stymied Bilam. Bilam couldn't understand how randomness can be squared away with purposefulness. But I would like to argue that the randomness, the carry of creation is what makes life purposeful, because all I can do is not, I can't manipulate the situation. And God is not going to manipulate a situation, but I can respond to the world around me. I can realize my purpose. I can be that, I can pop my popcorn kernel, if you would, at the moment that I choose to. Mordecai says to Esther, you don't understand, Esther. The Jews will survive. The only question is, where are you? What will you make of your world? Where will you make sense of all of this randomness? If you remain quiet at this time, someone's going to save the Jews. That's the pattern. That's something that is determined. That's something that is set into creation. That there is an end, there is a Mashiach, there is a salvation that will happen. But you're going to be lost. Where are you? You are at this moment in a seemingly random existence. Answer to that randomness. Find your carry. Find the purposefulness. Find your kriya, as it were, in that carry. Otherwise, you're lost to history. Someone else is going to claim the glory. Who knows? Maybe this is why you're exactly here at this moment, to bring about a salvation. So God is sitting there wondering, saying, how is it all going to play out? I know at the end of the day, all the popcorn's going to get popped, but who's going to be the one who's going to be popping at any one moment? For those of you who like a slightly more let's say elegant mashal, imagine nuclear fission, right? Where you know that each atom doesn't, you can't determine when each individual atom is going to fissure, right? But you know to the Swiss clock when a large group of those atoms will have fissure at a precisely determined time. In other words, there is a pattern. Things will work out. The only question is, where is your role? Where is your carry? There is a kri'ah. You have to read the purposefulness, your own purposefulness into your circumstance, into your existence, into the randomness of life. And if you will indulge me, I think that this is essentially what the lashon of yikar delivers. Layudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason v'yikar. The idea of yakrut, the idea of preciousness, the idea of, as it's mistranslated here, honor, is or glory, is finding the purposefulness to the carry around us, not denying the carry. Again, I don't want to dismiss Bilam and his carry because he's a heavyweight. I want to acknowledge reality and say, oftentimes, we have difficulty making sense of the seeming chaos and randomness, and you have the greatest person who just gets hit by a car, or you have babies who are strangled, and it seems absolutely random. But our job is to embrace that carry and to find our calling within that carry. And I will end with a fascinating midrash, which I'm sure all of you heard when you were young children. I heard it when I was a young child. Only recently did it start to make sense to me. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Amar. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, Esther yirak roket taita. Esther was green. The idea of yerak, which has within it the word carry, right? I'm not trying to do a word play here. It's the same concept of potential. It's the same concept of something that has not yet reached to fruition, something that does not yet have a calling, but is a random element. Esther was not yet fully formed until she saw her calling, until deep into her life, circumstances put her in the place where she said, I will be the one to save Israel. And go fast for me. Don't fast for Israel, fast for my success. Pray for my success, because it's all dependent on me and my realizing my potential, my realizing that my yirak roket hayita, she was greenish. And I'm not going to go into all ideas here of how green basically symbolizes that which is the most wasteful and unformed, the most wasteful within evolution. But for those who are more scientifically minded, you'll understand that. But it's a language of being in potential and trying to tap into that potential. So I'm 3 minutes over, which is offends my yucky sensibilities, but I would like to give 1 minute of try to provide a synopsis for today's shiur, which is very, very complicated shiur. But what I attempted to do in finding Bil'am in Megillat Esther was to seek out the mikra, the carry, as the philosophy of Amalek, and not just merely to dismiss that philosophy and say, no, we always have to look for kri'ah, we always have to look for calling, but to notice that the aleph that called Moshe is small, in that Moshe find the kri'ah in the carry, vayikar, the word is vayikar, and then there's a tiny little aleph there that God says, in all of this randomness in which I delight, in which I'm sitting there wondering how things are going to work out, I know that things will work out. But what role are you going to play in how they work out? And that to me is finding Bil'am and Bil'am's misunderstanding, fundamental misunderstanding of the beauty of randomness, of the potential of randomness, and of the reality of randomness. And so far be it from me to deny the randomness that surrounds us all, but may I suggest for myself and for all of us that we try and put that aleph on top of that carry of vayikar and turn our carry into something mamash yakar. Hayudim hayta ora b'simcha v'sason v'yikar. Thank you all very much. And I know this was complicated, but if anyone has any questions or would like to discuss further, then I'm happy to.
Great job, Tamar. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Wait, how do I don't even know how to get to the questions here.
Wow.
Let's see, there we go. Okay.
Tamar,
Yes.
I have a new project
Yes.
for you.
Yes.
See how this connects very nicely to Eov and how Eov finally got on board.
See how the idea of Bil'am connects to Eov and how he gets over his
the idea of accepting randomness and doing something to change it in the end when he prayed finally for the Re'im. He got out of his randomness himself and prayed for the Re'im, and everything turned around.
Okay. I will look at that because I have to, deepen my presentation of this. So thank you. Were there any points in the shiur that you'd like more explicit explanation of? Yes, Carol.
Yeah, it's not a question, but it's a comment. I don't think you emphasized this part about the three qualities that Bilam had that Moshe didn't, and that they're very it goes with your whole point, that they were very definite. I mean, they were, you know what I mean? There was no amorphousness. Like he knew who, he knew where. It was any time. He didn't have, whereas Moshe was finding God in kind of in the randomness. It was kind of like God called him. It wasn't like set in advance. It was
right. Very good point. I see. Bilam's makeup was much more
please
of
mute
a
everybody else. Please mute everyone. Otherwise, we're hearing random noises. Random.
Right. One person at a time. Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that, Carol, that it's specifically in the qualities that are assigned to Bilam that we see a certain, very desperate way of
like
looking
a
at the world.
rigidness, a predeterminedness.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Whereas there's no, there's no positive spin on how he could possibly perceive the world. He's blind. He was blind to how God could possibly find joy in the randomness of our existence.
Right.
When
fluidity.
Yeah. We choose, when a child is born, we choose to say there's great chosenness to the child, that this is right, and it like this certain qualities of the child, right? That there was like a reason why the child looks the way he does or acts the way he does and has the neshama that he does, and I find this midrash in Chulin to answer to something that there's a tremendous randomness to the human being that's born, right? And this is the ultimate expression of randomness is a human being, because we take it so personally, right? But truly, scientifically, there's a randomness there, and so that if we can find meaning where Bilam couldn't, right? In God is finding meaning there. God is saying, I'm enjoying this, right? I want to see what happens. And what happens is all about what we can bring to the table. When my popcorn kernel pops, so to speak, right? What Esther will say, he got the malchut. When this is your moment, you have one moment. Maybe your moment comes when you're 93. Maybe your moment comes when you're 5. Maybe your moment comes when you're 8 months old. Whatever the moment is, but why are you here? And so it's a very, very
I think
profound.
the word, when you talk about the baby, the word that came to me was potential. Like it's not so much randomness. It's like there are all these possibilities. There's all this potential, and what will be actualized is kind of not.
Yes, but the particular baby that emerges is the product of an extremely random and wasteful
right
act.
all this
It's insane, when you and I was always, as a good religious girl, was always, it's specifically this one that's meant for, but no, I don't think that that's true. In my neshama, I don't think that that's true, but that doesn't affect the glory of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't diminish it at all. I know I'm talking in in very broad and very conceptual terms, but I hope that it's appreciated. Okay.
Is it possible to get your email or phone number? Better phone
Yes,
number.
I'm leaving it right here, and I'd love to continue this conversation. I'm leaving it in the chat.
You're leaving the
And
phone number or the email?
I'm leaving both. I left my email and I'm leaving my phone number.
Because you quoted the psukim in Maseh Bereshit about the creation of life, which is what happens on the third day. Life is created. What is life? Your insights are very good, but I think it's possible to expand the insights based on scientific discovery, pardon my using the term, from the 1950s by the two biggest proclaimed atheists who were scientists who discovered the meaning of life. And yet, and it's there in the psukim, what they discovered. And I would be very happy to discuss it with you. And because I think that you could sharpen your concepts even more.
I would appreciate that greatly because there's only so much that I'm capable of doing because I'm not a scientific, I don't have a scientific background, nor do I think so much in those terms. It's just that I felt so strongly about this idea of not dismissing Kerry the way that it traditionally is dismissed, right? There's usually a nice little package that's created, Kriya versus Mikra. And let's just, do away with Mikra when it doesn't ring true to me. So I appreciate any more information that I could possibly, all of the details feed into that same central concept. I trust it to be true. And I hope that you also as well, that it resonated with you as reflective of reality. And
there's no doubt that that the process of reproduction is a kind of a random process. And yet, if you look into the details behind it, the science behind it, you understand why those people who say, well, it's all random and it all came about randomly and so on, it's nonsense.
Yeah. To both extremes to me seem facile and childish. I think it's that middle, it's that standing and straddling both worlds of randomness and meaning that we're charged to do in this world. I forgot something, and for those of you who are still here, I'm so happy that you are still here, because do you know what happened to Bilam? I forgot to tell you this because I was rushing through these sources. What happened to Bilam at the end of his life? He was killed. He died. But what was his ultimate punishment? Let me see if I can bring it here. Let me see if I have it. Don't leave before you see this. Check this out. Ay, Chazal, right? Onkelos went and raised Bilam from the grave, and he said to him, "Who's the most important in the world where you are now, right? In the world to come, the Jewish people." Onkelos said, "Should I then convert?" And Bilam said, "No, don't bother." He maintains his Kerry, his nihilism, even into the grave. And then this is, ay, Chazal. Onkelos says, "What is the punishment for someone like you?" And he says, "I spend eternity cooking in a vat of boiling semen."
Oh, wow.
Oh my goodness, Chazal. אין מה להגיד על זה. This from Masechet Gittin. And when I saw that, I'm just it's the defeat of nihilism. Our job on Purim is to defeat Bilam, but also to acknowledge the truth that Kerry is very real, and Kerry is the stuff of life. literally. So with that, I bid you all go. I just wanted to make sure I get to any questions. In Parshat Balak, Moshe is kept at a remove, and Moshe's perspective is kept separate. What did you mean by that, Justin? Moshe's perspective is kept separate. Moshe's kept at a remove. I see. I understand now. If you want to explain it, please.
Simply that, especially to buttress everything that you've presented, Moshe is able to get the big picture, say, and Bilam is this manipulative character, and in that parsha, Moshe is like out of the picture as much as possible, and everybody wonders why is that.
Write that down. Thank you.
So it seems like that, but it buttresses everything, and also
absolutely
just add that when Moshe ultimately fails at the rock. It's something where he couldn't conceive of what was absolutely necessary, that he had to wait for, that he had to be resilient with, and then he had to be manipulative, and that was his failure there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. I have to add that into my write-up on this. It's a very, very critical point. Yes, absolutely. Doesn't this also help to understand how to reconcile foreknowledge with free will? Hashem knows the ultimate end, but leaves to individuals how it happens. It's something that I find so many people have difficulty, myself included, until I chanced on this rabbit hole of thought, this idea of finding purpose in life when the purpose is entirely really up to me. And I really have true free will to determine my own role. Yes, there's the top down, the patterns, the structures that are there, but that popcorn will get popped. The nuclear material will fissure at a very, very specific half-life. If I said that right, I'm sorry for all the scientists out there, but every individual atom and piece of popcorn will have its own trajectory that is entirely random and can never be predicted. Thank you. Yes, Mira, I'm very happy. If you want to come up to the Galil, then bוא נשב ביחד. Yes, Mira. Okay, Yofi. So with that, I bid you all a good night, and please do continue to be in touch. Laila Tov.
Thank you.
Yom Tov. Pleasure.